and welcome to the Disability Education in Society podcast. This is a podcast for collective learning and unlearning in the struggle for intersectional liberation. We focus on educational realms, expanding to other societal areas. We share our stories as academics as well as those of our featured guests, including disability activists involved with multifaceted dimensions of systems equity, self-determination efforts, anti-ableist, and anti-racist liberation. Join us as co-conspirators. For this episode, we continue the conversation with Dr. Parrey. Dr. Parrey is a senior lecturer in disability studies at Eastern Washington University. He received his PhD in disability studies from the University of Illinois in Chicago with a certificate in gender and women's studies in spring 2014. His research and teaching focus on the implications of moments in which the meaning of disability and our relation to it is an open question. Outside of academia, he was an active member of the disability community in Spokane, Washington.
I was wondering, what you mentioned about targeting and how going back to the question I asked earlier about how people might see these targeting acts as very innocent. And I'm talking about non-disabled people here. I'm saying well, that seems like a good idea. That's very well intentioned. I want to pray for you, right? I want to take a picture so that you will inspire other disabled folks. So that again, it's a big contrast. I feel like, I mean, on one hand, it's we're talking about targeting, we're talking about harms. On the other hand, we're talking about this really innocent, very well-intentioned sort of acts, if you will. So I guess I'm just wondering, right, if you want to say more about how different those two viewpoints are in this conversation about how ableism feels, right? Because a non-disabled person will not feel ableism; they feel something else, and it's again for me very different than this harm that you're sharing.
Well, I think that's one of the I don't know if that's all this discussion of praying, but these are the words I'm going to use. One of ableism's greatest tricks is to convince you that it doesn't exist. But I mean, I'm half joking, but no, I think that's true too, or accurate, right? In writing, in his thinking the event that I mentioned earlier, Francois Rafoul identifies at least three ways that events have been watered down in philosophy, and that's beyond our discussion right now. But one of them is, he says, well, what happened is we experience events, big moments, or moments that have lasting ripples through life, meaningful moments, like well, anything, whatever they are for us, and we neuter them by explaining them away as saying, well, it's a matter of cause and effect, or it's personal. It's this happened to, when we say, why did this happen to me? Or why did he or she or they do that, say this? And so in response to your question, Paolo, if and when we get wrapped up in, well, now that person was well-intentioned. If they didn't mean anything bad by it, well, who cares? We all say this, not everybody is my mother, but that's exactly what she said.
One thing, Ryan, that I'm thinking in
Mhm.
terms of the eventfulness of the event, right?
Mhm.
Is in this case you have two instances where agency is trampled. The I think part of the answer to Paulo's question is, what's the problem with these innocent acts? Well, both of them are assuming that you as a person are um, incomplete because you have a disability. So just by being cured, you'll be yourself. You'll be truly human. It's almost like it's
Mhm.
denying your humanity. And so the prayer is going to make you whole, make you human. Um,
Right.
in the other case, the assumption is, well, there is all these other folks with disabilities who are worse than you, and I'm going to take away your agency because I think my messianic role as an able person, right, as somebody
Mhm.
who's non-disabled, I want to use you, and I don't care if you want to, but I do want to use your picture to do my thing.
Hmm.
They are not really assuming, they are not asking, are you interested in help me pursue this mission that I have, or whatever.
Mhm.
They're imposing their mission on you, right? Because as
Oh yeah.
non-disabled, they know better. You as a disabled person don't even know how useful your picture could be. The
Right.
non-disabled nurse knows that. You cannot know that. Um,
No.
so the issue of agency and even the sense of humanity is
Mhm.
at stake in this eventfulness of events that seem innocent, uh, and become part of the everyday experience of what kids go through, what
Mhm.
adults with disabilities go through everywhere. So it's just quite interesting.
It is, and I think that is why I tried I try hard to identify these moments that seem so innocent or well intentioned. Um, because those are exactly, if we let them have if we don't stop and consider them, every everything just keeps rolling along. In when you were saying in your when you said that you've been stopped and prayed for and accused of having little or no faith, um, when you refuse the prayer, you know, it's interesting, right? That well, it's your lack of faith must be the problem, not the fact that you do not want to be a different way. That's unimaginable. It must be. You don't think it'll work.
Yeah, I'm proud of being disabled. I mean, that's something
Right.
that they cannot take. No, God meant you to be a sighted person. You
Right.
cannot be blind, because if you're blind, you're violating the God's purpose or something. I mean, it's so
Right.
disability in itself becomes part of the almost like a sinful thing that goes against what God intended and whatever. I mean, all that stuff.
Right. And it's not just that, oh, I guess it is. No, it has to be.
Hmm.
It has to be interpreted as that
Right.
because there are no other options.
Um, I'm thinking, Paulo, that this is a good moment to go down into some of the questions that you wanted to ask that are more uh, tangible in terms of what some of the audience,
Yeah.
people in the audience who are not so inclined to do the philosophical approaches to this would be kind of interested. So why don't we take some of your questions, Paulo?
I really do appreciate both of your thoughts about these issues, and again, as someone who I don't identify, I identify as non-disabled person, still trying to learn about ableism, and I think this idea of like the feeling of ableism, and I think that really kind of helps to put some texture into this concept of ableism. And so I'm wondering too, as coming from a teacher educator background, and as well as a parent of a disabled person, I'm wondering about, like, Ryan, what you would say to like educators. I mean, a lot of this podcast is about education. I feel like we learned so much. I've learned quite a bit in this very brief conversations that we've had here. So I'm wondering, Ryan, what would you say to educators and parents who want to introduce this idea of relational ableism in the way they interact with their students in K to 12 classrooms, or even higher education, or children that they care for?
Mhm. Yeah, I've had the chance to at EWU. I've had the chance to work with many pre-service teachers, and I would say to listeners or viewers the same thing I would say to them is, right, learn all you can, become experts at your jobs, but remember, right, when it comes to students and their experiences, well, they're the experts, and don't and be careful not to misinterpret what's going on. So I'm reminded of a very concrete experience, another concrete experience I had growing up in first grade. My daughter just finished first grade, so I all year I was on the lookout uh, for to help her avoid my experiences, and then I realized that she was never going to have those experiences because she's not disabled.
Mm.
Um, but I in my first grade, I visually impaired. I could not see the blackboard, uh, even from the front row of the classroom, and so for some reason, my teacher decided, well, the solution to this problem is to put my desk right in front of the board, right against the wall.
Hmm.
And it's like being in the front row at the movie theater. It's way too close. So it didn't serve that goal at all. And obviously it physically and in every way made me stand out or stick out from the other students in the room. Um, and if you look at it one way, it's possible that that teacher thought she was doing the right thing or a good thing. Honestly, I don't think she did think that. I believe she was trying to, I don't even have a word for it. Um, be a jerk, basically. Um, but regardless, it could be argued. Well, no. She didn't know. We didn't have ADA best practices in the early '80s. She didn't know. She was trying her best. Um, Maybe, but where in that situation, where in that room was ableism? And it was everywhere. And if I had been invited to say, well, this doesn't help. This is sitting in front of the board is almost worse than sitting, 10 feet from the board. What I really need to do is be able to get up and come up and look at what's been written down or whatever. Um, but having, using that we were clearly in what is it, the banking approach or exchange economy of education, and not a collaborative one where students and teachers can figure out together how to do things, which would have been nice. I've got a student right now doing the disability studies minor, who wants to be, I think she wants to be a math educator, which Paolo, I think you have some experience with.
That's right.
And um, and she's fantastic because she's again, she's learning everything about math, about teaching math, um, and she's doing a lot of her work that she's doing for the minor is about addressing the explicit and implicit concerns or concernedness of pre-service teachers. So, for instance, she's found studies that of pre-service teachers saying, well, we're nervous about working with disabled students. We're not going to be ready. We're not going to be prepared. And so some responses to that have been, well, here's what we need to do for those teachers is give them all the information about diabetes or celiac or particular impairments, and that will make them less nervous. And my contribution to her education has been to respond to those kinds of things by saying, well, now, how do we know that part of the concern that these pre-service teachers are feeling is an ableism? Rather than saying, here's all the information about particular impairments, well, how is having that information going to make you a better teacher in the classroom? It's not. But if we can work to address and then redress ableism in the classroom within the people, that can lead to concrete changes. What kinds of concrete changes? I don't know. I don't necessarily know all of them. Maybe there's accessible, more or less accessible ways of doing things, of organizing and planning, of setting up the room, and that's terrific. But almost more fundamentally, right, is to be okay with not knowing, not being the expert on part of the classroom. And even if that part is a particular student with an impairment, or the fact that any student could have an impairment, you can do a very accessible classroom even if no disabled students enter it. It's still accessible, right? And it's still going to matter and make a difference for whoever is in the room.
Alexis, I really like this. I think what I hear you saying is to position disabled students as experts and really like looking at, you shared your first grade experience as that. There's an expert right there, a first grader who can tell you a lot of things about what is wrong with doing certain things. And so I think that's I feel like a very anti-ableist and very concrete way, like for suggestions for teachers. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I always worry because it doesn't feel concrete to me. So I'm glad to hear that it might be. That's good. Thank you for the question.
Hi there. While we intend to make our podcast as accessible as possible, we ask those that have the financial means to support us by subscribing as a patron to our podcast for as little as $5 a month. To subscribe, go to our website, disabilityed.podbean.com. By subscribing as a patron, you will help ensure that we can continue to create and share new episodes while supporting other co-conspirators who face financial and health difficulties. For those with financial difficulties, please connect with us about obtaining a free copy of our books and or engaging in additional conversations with us. You can also support this show by hitting the follow button, share this podcast with among your network, and leave us a comment and positive rating. Your support means so much.
Yeah, and I think it extends to my next question, which is a broader question. These folks with disability as experts idea connected to the sentipensante stuff we were talking before.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that could move forward the disability justice movement? In terms of how we approach disability justice, both as disabled folks and also working with allies who are non-disabled, having a more relational sentipensante approach to ableism and disability. How do you think it can help move forward the needle on that?
Well, first, I think it's important to remember that as we're working together and with allies, we're also working with opponents. And I point that out because I think we forget that, we know it obviously, but but I think that's exactly where sentipensante, relational ontology comes in, because with that, we're able to frame the issue differently, right? We're not just saying, don't think this, don't do this, don't feel that way. We are, but that's never going to work. You can't just say, hey, racist, don't be racist. Probably. I wish that was that easy. But you can, well, even that, you can't say, hey, racist, your approach is dehumanizing, because they know that. That's the point of it. So okay, Alexis, I'm going to ask you, and Paolo, how do we activate disability justice in a way that it targets the people and ways of relating that need to be adjusted, while bringing together the peoples and ways of relating that need to be bolstered? And I know I've just asked you a question, but now let me answer. Let me answer it. And then you please. I think there's a lot of value simply in saying, hey, disability and ableism, none of it is just something that can be pointed to and defined definitively for once and for all, and then addressed and fixed. Right? Because just as I don't want somebody to come and try to pray my blindness or visual impairment away to fix it, if I could just fix ableism with the flick of a switch, well, there's no even, I would want that to happen, but what's valuable, the work, the effort, is what matters, right? For the teachers in the classroom, trying something and succeeding or not is more important than not doing anything, or even, I would say, being perfect right away. It's, sorry, to answer your question and then my question, right? I think it's, or I feel it's realizing that it all of this is about intentional and intentionally being work in progress.
And I don't know if this answers your question, but I'm thinking of the issue of compliance, ADA
Mm,
compliance,
mhm,
IDEA compliance. A lot of
mhm,
people think that because we have a Civil Rights Act that prohibits racism, it does away, it already created a better society. When in fact, compliance at the legal level is probably the most superficial of um, these dimensions. And sometimes when people do it with a lot of ableist sentiments,
mhm.
um, the ADA compliance portion of things can backfire in workplaces and in many other environments. So I think it's an interesting point that you bring up, that
Mm,
the value of always working, always knowing that there is effort ahead, that is not a magic bullet that's going to fix things. Yeah. Right.
yeah, I always frame it in terms of, I always say it's about ethics, not etiquette.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And we don't we like you're saying, the last thing I would want, or I think we want, is a checklist.
Right.
Mhm.
To say,
And
well,
that's what
I've
that's what they use in a lot of the IDEA
mhm,
context, and a lot of the teachers that are listening to us know that what the committee does in those rooms when they have IEP meetings, the individual education program meetings
mhm,
for IDEA, is they just go through that checklist, and not so much about the symbolism of relational things that could be changed to do away with the ableist, right? The ableist atmosphere that's really harming the students' progress or those kinds of things, right?
I really like what you said, Ryan, about this idea, like, yeah, of progress and how and it made me think about Robin D.G. Kelly's notion about freedom dreams, where there's that it criticizes that we always judge the plan, if you will, by its success. We don't judge it by its
mm,
merit. And so I feel like that's been going back to what Alexis talked about with individualized education programs. I mean, it's always about like, well, can we how do we measure success? Can we get to this point? Can we do this? If we can't, it's not worth doing.
right.
And it's been like my experience that it's always about like, can we do it? And if we can't do it, it's not even worth doing it. Can we show that we're doing it? Can we show that we're making progress? And so this idea of like the merit and the ethics, I think that's so important to highlight about this work of ableism, of working against ableism.
Well, I thank you. I need to, and you'll have to tell me later that author, because I don't know that I know them, um, but I want to. But like similarly, I've taught med students, and they have said how not con. I'm going to make it sound confrontational. It wasn't said that way, but they'll say, "Well, how is this going to make me a better doctor?"
Mm.
And I realized pretty quickly, I don't know. I absolutely can't point to the times and places where the things you're learning here are going to have absolute concrete measurable value for your doctoring, but I'll tell you that it will. And I know that that's the case for teachers, for all kinds of people. Um, um, and that's okay. Exactly like you were saying, well, if it's going to, is it going to work? And if so, when, where, and how? If we can't answer that, we shouldn't even do it. No, maybe we should, maybe we should do it even more, because we can't know when and where it'll make a difference, but we know that it will, or it might. I mean, that's the thing. It might, it might make a difference. It has to matter, has to have value, has to have investment, right? Um, because you just don't know what's going to stick.
Right. Thank you, Ryan. We're getting to the end of our time, but Paula is going to ask you a couple of questions so that we can wrap up these reflections that we've been having today. I really think what you have said so far is really powerful and very practical, it seems to me. Even though at the beginning, a lot of people may have been wondering, what's this philosophical stuff is going to help me when it comes to teaching or doing HR work or doing tangible things like the medicine realities or the nursing realities that they experience. So thank you. Paula?
Yeah, I think this is a very profound conversation, and I'm hoping that Ryan, if you want to share maybe one or two things that like you took away from this conversation and you want our listeners to take away as again we wrap up our conversation, that I'm sad that it's ending, but I'm hoping that we can have some sort of tangible things that people will say, oh, this is something that I feel like this is, there are many great things, but if you could just point to one or two from your own reflection.
Sure. Well, this is my backdoor attempt to become a co-host of the podcast. I've always wanted to do a podcast, and here it is. I really appreciate that you both think that this has actionable legs to it. Because I think that I know that I get so wrapped up in the theory and the abstraction and the thinking and feeling and all of that. And as much as I love the idea of, oh, it's about ethics, not etiquette, we're not trying to check off boxes, I still think, well, what are we going to have to show for it, and how are we going to be able to demonstrate that it's useful and good, and all of this, and that you're both responding with, well, no, we can. It is useful, and does have value. I just appreciate that. I guess the real takeaway then, right, is, well, don't give up. To build off of what you were saying, Paolo, right? It's perhaps the issue isn't the figuring out how to get to a particular destination, but rather refiguring how do we start that journey. And so I'm reminded of, I had a colleague come to me with teachers in training who were encountering in a composition class two students who were probably on the autism spectrum and were verbal, but not overly so, not terribly outgoing to be accurate. But, and they wanted to know, well, what can we do better? What can we do differently? Do I have any tips or tricks for them to get these students to participate more? And we had a conversation, and we realized that what they're doing is giving these students what they think they're doing is giving their students opportunities to participate in class. And we kind of realized together what they were doing is giving them opportunities to participate in particular ways that were not led by those students. And don't get me wrong, I don't think it's disabled learners' responsibility to know how they learn best, especially not younger people. You can't say, young person, take the lead. They don't know. But you can in a way, right? But we realized that there were ways to build in or bake in participation potential in different ways. In this case, it was digital alternate format, virtual alternate format modalities. And I don't know if it actually worked with those students or not, but we all thought, leaving that conversation, we all thought it could. And that is, having that new starting point seems to have made a difference.
Love that idea. Thank you so much, Ryan, of this new starting points. And as we close out, if folks want to find more about your work, is there any other avenues that your work shows up that they can follow up with you?
No, but I'm working on it. You can become you can like the EWU Disability Studies Facebook page. My plan is to get us active on Instagram and Threads and I guess Twitter and social media, get us more active on there. As far as my work, I've got some essays in Disability Studies Quarterly, and the Journal of Literary and Cultural Disability Studies. I've got an essay there that's specific, that spends more time with this ethics, not etiquette idea, specifically in classrooms. That might be worth looking into.
Okay, we'll be sure to link those to the show notes so that our listeners can have access to those as well. So thank you so much, Ryan. We really appreciate the time and all of your thoughts and that you shared with us today.
Thanks, you Ryan. So much. Thank you both. It was great, really great to meet you, Paolo. And I hope we'll be in touch in the future.
Thank you so much for engaging with the DES podcast. We post new episodes every few weeks. The DES podcast is made possible and sustainable in solidarity with you and those who generously volunteer their time to converse with us. We hope you join us on our next episode.